Build versus buy. You know you need device management, but should you build it yourself or find a software partner? Let's dive in. Hi, I'm Keith Sott, VP of Innovation and Solutions at Esper, and you're watching Fleet Geek. Build your dedicated device fleet your way. Today we're going to talk about the important decision of build versus buy for your platform's device management. So whether you're in business in consumer space, in a commercial space, dedicated devices and precise device management are key for success. There are some cases where you may not want it, very few. We'll talk about that, and then we'll go into why you should really consider it if you're serious about business success with your dedicated device fleets. Let's jump in. MDM, build versus buy. Let me start out by saying that Esper is much more than just MDM, but let's start with MDM because from your frame of reference, typically that's how companies look at the decision of build versus buy, right? Do you build your own MDM or do you quote unquote buy it? And this is a very important distinction to make. A lot of times you look at it and say, hey, this MDM stuff is not that hard. I can just devote an engineer to it, we can crank it out, we're good to go, and we maintain it, we own it. No additional infrastructure costs associated with it. But I just said the key word with MDM. It really is a core piece of infrastructure for dedicated devices. Unlike the employee use case that you traditionally see MDM centered around, if your device deployed in the field in the wild goes down or has an issue, you don't have a human typically associated with that device to take care of it. So the view on what MDM should provide, what it was originally built for, you have to put a different lens on it when you consider this build versus buy decision for your dedicated device fleet. So now it goes to, well, what does it take to be able to build your own MDM? So you're thinking, hey, I can devote an engineer to this. We can crank it out, we can deliver it, we're good to go. This takes us into kind of the business side of it, if you will, strategic side of you're devoting precious developer resources for a piece of commonly available infrastructure. And does that necessarily make sense? It depends on what your business is focused on. So kind of the rule that I use, it's really loose, is one headcount. Can I get away with this with one headcount or less? If you look at the cost of a top-notch developer for that one headcount, it's very expensive. So even in that simple model, it really leans towards thinking about how you outsource your infrastructure and instead be able to buy it versus build, because it's not just that initial implementation. If you have ownership of this infrastructure, you're going to have to track all the changes that happen with the Android operating system. You're going to have to deal with the peculiarities between different Android device types in terms of how they behave with device management. And oh, by the way, this is assuming that you're just building device management. And so this goes into advanced features, like what are companies such as Esper building in the market that you would get on the buy side? So one thing that you get over here is like the core MDM. It's the foundation for everything. You get your application management on top of it. And so that way, whether it's a GMS device or an AOSP device, you have a consistent device management implementation on the other end against the device. And then you have the ability to manage your apps, whether you do it through Play Store on a GMS device or Esper Cloud going between GMS and AOSP. You get the best of both worlds. So you can see the direction that I'm taking the case here. Before I go too deep and you flick me off as not being credible talking about this, why don't we just switch gears to say, when does it make sense to build your own MDM? So kind of the way that I look at it is, what's your business model? I keep on going to business model. I know I'm an ex-product manager, so I can't help myself. And what's your use case? So I go back to that one headcount situation where if I have one piece of hardware, basically one complete device, OS, the hardware configuration that I'm going to use, and I know that it's going to stay the same for the life of my business. And my business is not very dynamic, meaning I'm not having to do a lot of firmware updates to the device. I'm not having to deal with rapidly changing applications. And you are willing to devote that headcount to understand the management infrastructure that's built into the Android OS. And you're also willing to take on the other side, meaning whatever you run, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, to be able to build, maintain, and rely upon that. Then perhaps building your own might make sense. But this runs out very quickly because there's really not a lot of companies in that situation. As soon as you need to consider a different device, a different piece of hardware, this starts to break down because now you've just doubled your coverage where it's not one device, it's two. And also the converse of that is you are hemmed in, and if there are some supply chain problems, you are relying on that one headcount, which, by the way, could do probably a lot more interesting things to drive your business forward, to basically figure all this out, and it's going to be an emergency. You go over to buy, and this is what Esper is all about, right? We're about the Android ecosystem. This is what we are plugged into. This is what we're a participant of. And so it's really understanding the directions of the Android OS, all the different hardware that's coming out, making sure that we support it. We provide a uniform implementation as best as we can, because again, in Android, there are always anomalies, to give you that consistent execution to the device that you would expect a piece of infrastructure such as ours to provide. And so that goes to another key point, that you are committing this headcount over a long period of time. Because again, you're going to have to track all the changes that are going on, make sure that you deliver compatibility, especially if you have a more diverse fleet. So that's like the first cutoff. If you have a diverse fleet, a mixed fleet, doing your own device management probably is not going to make sense for you, and you're going to find yourself with an initial ante of, let's say, one developer, it quickly expanding over time. So from that perspective, relying on outsourced infrastructure to be able to provide it makes a heck of a lot more sense. Now, this is just the baseline because, again, for Esper, we're talking about DevOps for devices, right? And what we're doing is essentially on that foundation of MDM, we're building all the infrastructure to work across GMS or AOSP to support dedicated device use cases. We're specialists from that perspective. And so this is our infrastructure for pipelines, to be able to roll out application updates in stages. These are the concepts such as blueprints and managing against drift that we've recently introduced through our platform. So it really is through Esper, we are at a central point to think about all the different use cases and activities that are going out in the broad Android dedicated device market, and distill it down into features that we build that deliver value add for dedicated device use cases through our platform. So it's well beyond MDM, it's beyond MAM, mobile application management, into our DevOps for devices, and that's what we're really focused on driving and make sure that you're successful as a part of it. Full disclosure, I work at Esper, so I'm going to be a little biased towards Esper, but let's do a step back just with device management in general and ignoring the great features that as infrastructure Esper brings to the table. You also need to consider that when you're buying infrastructure via MDM, you are carefully considering what you're buying. One general category are companies that come from the traditional IT management space for BYOD, and you're going to find a square peg round hole in terms of what they focus on, the user experience, the feature set that they deliver as infrastructure in this particular use case. At the other end, it's not unusual for device makers to have their own kind of proprietary MDM stack that they will offer you, typically at an economical price. There's a reason why it's economical. It's adder for them, and it locks you into them as a particular supplier. So again, it might be fine that if you have one device and you have relatively simple needs, this will serve you well, but you have to be careful because if you have aggressive expansion plans, you don't know what the future holds. It can hem you into a situation that is very hard to get out of, arguably by design. So I would suggest to carefully consider where you source your device management from, whether it's Esper or some other company, that you really think through your business roadmap, how you think that your business will grow over time, what emerging use cases on your roadmap, what are they? So that way you can map it back to making the best decision around infrastructure that you can. The final thing that I want to hit on that's very important is opportunity cost. I did talk about this from the perspective of devoting your precious headcount to doing infrastructure that you can outsource. Why would you do that? It really is, what are you trying to do with your business and what are you giving up for spending money outlay for a headcount with respect to hiring to do this yourself versus having something that is tuned to the success of your business. That's the other point, is like, you don't pay for the infrastructure unless you have a device that's out there being monetized. So it is very in resonance with what you're trying to do as a company, where it's basically an operating expenditure versus a capital expenditure from the hardware perspective, or a headcount. So it can be a nice way to go. It certainly isn't for everybody, but just wanted to open your eyes for you to think about the different vectors, if you will, as you consider build versus buy for your device management in dedicated device fleets.